My name is TK Donle, and today's date is August 22nd, 2014. We are here at the PIA technical meetings in Aurora, Colorado, right down the street from Denver. Good to be here. And we're going to talk a little history of skydiving. So where do we start? Well, today I'm Technical Director at Complete Parachute Solutions, and we are purely an organization that produces military equipment and provides some of the best training available on the planet for our military jumpers, both with tandem, solo equipment, and multi-mission equipment. But I made my first jump July 3rd, 1974 in Orange, Mass. Probably, I believe it's the first commercial parachute center in the United States. Long history there. And it was interesting. I didn't plan on making a jump that day, but my girlfriend Gloria and I were on Route 2 driving west in beautiful Berkshires and had no idea what we were getting ready to do, but we had a week off. And all of a sudden, somewhere on Route 2 near Orange, we start to see parachutes popping open around us, round canopies, orange and white ones. And we went, whoa! And then I had an immediate flashback that during high school, and I was 24 at the time, but during my high school years, my best friend Jeff Christensen and I, we would often talk about wanting to make a parachute jump. And unfortunately, Jeff died the following year in a car accident, and I never thought about making another jump after that. But there we were, 1974, and so we pulled off and followed the parachutes down and found the Orange Parachute Center, and I guess maybe about a half hour later, after chatting with a few people, we both signed up for our first jump. And I remember Gloria made 2 jumps that day, and I made 3. And it was a mind-bending experience for sure. It was also the first time I'd ever flown in an aircraft. So if you've ever experienced that, sitting in a Norseman across from the door, and I think I was going to be jumper number 3 on that stick, I couldn't believe that the airplane could actually get off the ground and fly, apparently in such a slow airspeed. So I thought that was something else, making your first jump, the first time you've ever been in an airplane. So it was a very memorable day for me. I think I made 8 jumps that year. And I didn't really look at skydiving as something that I would pursue as a regular sport. And I think the following year we made, I think I went back and made a few more jumps. And again, it's just something you would just go occasionally do, like going skiing. Well, let's go skiing. Okay, great. But I've been skiing since I was 5, so it was not a big deal. But during that winter break between my 2nd and 3rd year, I saw an article in a ski magazine, and it was a picture of a round canopy. I believe it was a paracommander descending on Stratton Mountain, Vermont. And a short little article said something about paraski competition and invitational accuracy parachuting, giant slalom ski racing. And I cut that article out and stuck it on the refrigerator, and I thought about that. I said, that's interesting, because I had a good background in ski racing. And that next year, March rolled around, snow was melted, got the motorcycle out. I had a Triumph Bonneville at the time, put my leathers on, walked over to the fridge, took that article that had been sitting there for months now on the fridge, put it in my pocket, and drove out to Orange. Located one of my older instructors from the 1st or 2nd year. I think it was Gary Pond, and Nate Pond's son. And I said, Gary, I held up that article. I says, what does it take to do this? And he looked at the article and he goes, paraski. He says, well, it's off-site, so you're going to need C or a D license, probably a C minimum. And I go, what is that? And he goes, well, 100 jumps to qualify for, 100 free falls to qualify for a C license. And I kind of swallowed, because I was like the world's worst student. I mean, my static line jumps were just atrocious. I mean, stability was something that I hadn't quite figured out yet. But while I was there, I made a couple of jumps that day, drove home, put that article back onto the fridge again, and thought about it. And within, I think, a 2-week period, I made the commitment, let's go for it. I want to compete in a paraski competition, so I guess we got to go get a C license. And that's what kind of cranked up my skydiving career right there. I managed to make 100 free falls, along with the 17 static line jumps that preceded that. And it was, again, I was just the world's worst student, which later on kind of helped me in my other endeavors as I became a skydiving instructor later on. I was able to always reflect back about my troubles in gaining stability and kind of grasping the concept of stability. And so there I am with my first para-ski race in Mount Southington, Connecticut. I had 117 jumps. I got my 100 free falls in, got my C license, and sure enough, that was enough to enter the competition. And it was kind of a memorable day. I remember Roger Ponce was our jump master, dispatching everybody over the mountain. And each time we would do a pass, the weather was coming in, and I'd hear Roger talk to the jumper before me going, he says, when the clouds are coming down, and he says, are you okay jumping at 2,000 feet? I know we had 3,500 feet earlier, but we only got about 2,500 feet now, and the next jumper was like down to 2,000. By the time I got to the door, we had to go make another pass, and we're coming in, and we're just underneath the cloud layer. And it was like, I'm looking at my altimeter, it's like 1,600 feet, and Roger looks at me, he says, you want to jump? And I go, are we good to jump at 1,500 feet? I mean, with my experience, he goes, it's up to you. I said, let's do it. Well, the spot wasn't all that good. I guess I delayed too long in the door. I didn't land at the top of the mountain. And back in those days, para-ski was, you're jumping with your ski boots. Your skis and poles are just outside the target area. And the idea was you land. If you don't land on the disc, then you got to run over the disc, get out of your parachute equipment, slap on your skis, and the time starts from the moment you touch the disc. Well, it turns out I didn't land on the top of the mountain. I landed in the parking lot at the base of the mountain. Well, they sent down a snowmobile, picked me up, drove me to the top, dropped me outside the target area. I ran over, touched the disc, ran to my skis. I happened to have a Wonder Hog at that time. And pulled the cutaway handle, left the harness on, threw my skis on, and because I worked in the ski industry at the time, I didn't have the leashes. I had ski brakes, so there was nothing to do other than to step in and go. So that time it took me to do that little procedure cut off a lot of time, which really helped. My ski racing background really helped, and as it turned out, I finished first in skiing at that competition, last in accuracy, which is how I pretty much ended up the rest of my accuracy career, because accuracy, it turns out, was not my thing. But I did compete in a few other para-ski meets after that. Did the 78 Cuervo Nationals and the Rossignol Para-Ski Championships, and they happened back-to-back weekends in 1978. One was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, the other in Sun Valley, Idaho. So that was a great experience. Met some wonderful people that have since been long-term skydiving friends ever since. How did we progress from there? I guess the next step was, I had a couple weeks vacation coming to me, and I was thinking about going to Canada, and I heard there was some good skydiving up there, so I talked to Dick Barber, and he was our local guru at CPI in Connecticut, and he gave me some contact numbers. I went up to Canada for a few weeks, and wouldn't you know, I stayed there for a year. Got my Canadian jump master instructor ratings, got my Canadian rigger rating at that time, and once again I found myself the following year, March, in Montreal, waiting for that snow to melt so we could go skydiving. And it's funny the turn of events that can happen. You know, you get to that intersection, we can go take the left fork or take the right fork. I had a friend who was moving his business, and I had started at that time learning how to sew during my rigging career, and I worked at a small little company up there with Mike Silva, and we're building parachute equipment, and he was going to move the company out to British Columbia. During that same week, my brother calls and said, hey, you want to go down to Florida? I got to move my girlfriend's family down to Florida. I'm driving the truck. You want to come with? And I thought about that. And here I am, been in Canada, cold, nasty winter. Been doing plenty of skiing in my entire life. That would have taken me to British Columbia if that was my direction, but I says, I want to go skydiving in Florida. So I went to Florida and helped the move happen there, and We went to the Boogie at Palatka, I think the St. Patty's Day Boogie in March. And I brought a bunch of stuff that I had built, you know, gear bags, logbook covers, checkbook covers, those type of little trinket things you can sell at the drop zone. And that was going to kind of fund my trip. So I had it all laid out. I went up on a skydive with some friends, come back down, all my stuff's gone. And I went, whoa. Now I'm waiting for my brother to come back because he's on a different skydive. And when he comes back, I go, what happened to all my stuff? I go, that's what's funding this trip. And he said, well, you're not going to believe it. This guy comes by, his name is Silly. He said, I didn't get his real name, but they call him Silly. And he makes silly suits. And he says, who has all this stuff? Who made all this stuff? And he looked at it and he bought it all. And my brother gives me a chunk of money. I'm going, great. And he says, and the guy wants to offer you a job. And I go, you kidding? No. He says, well, you can find him over there. So I ended up running into Mike Sarasoli, nicknamed Silly. And he says, hey, Monday, why don't you come on by the shop and we'll talk about see whether or not you want to work for me or not. Now, Mike's making silly suits and he's making the rapid transit system, a new harness container system. And after about a half-hour chat with Mike, I says, you know, this sounds like something I'd like to do. Later on that afternoon, I met some other friends who had a spare room to rent in their house right down the street. So I got a job, I got a place to live. Boom, made the transition. I called Canada, my friend up there who I was working with at the time, and I said, Barry Chapman was his name. And I said, Barry, I said, I got some bad news. I says, I came to Florida and somebody offered me a job and I think I'm going to stay. Is that going to be a problem between you and I? And he goes, not a problem, man. He says, I got called up and I'm going to go back to Angola and do a little mercenary work, so go for it. Turns out he was in the military, but he was also a merc on the side. And I lost touch with that gentleman, but what a character he was. So there I am in Florida, in the heart of skydiving, and I suppose the next transition that happened for me, besides learning how to build harness container systems and jumpsuits, some really popular stuff at the time, is that one day I'm working in the shop, and our shop is adjacent to the hangar at Donle Air Sports. And there's huge glass windows between the packing table, where I've got work laid out, and what's going on in the hangar next door. Now I'm working with a guy named Hoot Gibson, and who's taught me a tremendous amount of how to build harness container systems, and a real perfectionist. So he's out there dirt diving with two other people, and I can see that they're using an Air 182 as a mock-up in the hangar. And it's a little three-way that they're doing, and I could tell that the person in between, I knew there was Ken Coleman on the other side of Hoot, and this person in between, and the more I watched them dirt dive, I could tell that the person in the middle had very little knowledge about what they're doing, and they were kind of coaching them through the dirt dive, and they'd do more dirt dives, and boom, they're off in the airplane going skydive. Later on, I asked Hoot, I says, what were you guys doing in the hangar over there? He goes, oh, I can't tell you about that. Top secret stuff. Well, it turns out they're developing the accelerator freefall program, and they're working on level 1, brand new jumper. So yeah, the guy had 6 hours of ground training time. So what I was seeing was the preparation for that person's first jump. Hoot didn't allude to what accelerator freefall was until about 2 or 3 weeks later, after hanging out with him, sitting back at the end of the day, drinking with them and getting to know these guys, and then recognizing that I had a keen interest in student training. Because I just come down from Canada, so I had static line, the standard progression type stuff. And I found out what they were doing. They were taking students up, as we know it today, accelerated free fall, a long free fall on their first jump, basically extending that air time, that classroom time. And I got to know Ken Coleman really well. And every evening after work, we'd end up over at Gary Dupuy's house, and Gary owned Donle Air Sports, and he was also a big proponent for accelerated freefall. And I slowly worked my way into the group, and at that particular time, Rocky Evans was there, and it was Rocky and Hoot and Ken who were primarily doing most of the AFF work. I know there's a couple other folks who would come by from time to time, like John Robbins and Charlie Kim, that would help out. But I slowly worked my way in, and my first AFF instructor jump was with Ken Coleman. And of course, we had a lot of armchair time discussing the techniques of AFF. But literally, compared to what you do today to get an AFF rating, I had about a 10-minute briefing with Ken Coleman. He said, this is what you're going to do. You're going to be on reserve side, and you're going to do this if that happens, and this if that happens. Let's go. And there was my first introduction as an AFF jump master. And the jump went off like clockwork, no issues. We did well. And I kind of worked my way into the regimen of working with either Ken or Rocky or Hoot in subsequent AFF jumps. And I had a keen respect for the program because of my own student background, which was, I was the world's worst, you know. So I could see the real benefit of accelerated freefall. And just things progressed from there. I became eventually an IE. And this was before USPA picked it up. This is several years. This is 1979. Before, and I believe 1981 is when USPA decided to accept the AFF program and endorse it. So I became one of the first AFF IEs, and I think I worked the first 34 courses as an IE, traveled all around the country with these guys. So that was pretty neat. A few years later, tandem came around, was a tandem test jumper in 1983. I remember making my first tandem jump without a drogue with my soon-to-be wife, Martha Scott. We were in Mr. Douglas, went up to 15,000 and did a long delay, and we did a couple of style series, you know, left turn, right turn, back loop. Did another one, opened the parachute, landed within 3 feet of the disc, and what's so tough about this? So we slowly worked into tandem, and shortly thereafter I was offered a job in Germany, a limited partnership in a small company that wanted to build harness container systems. Had been working with that owner for quite some time. He would order equipment, he would show up in the day that he said he would be there, pay cash for the equipment, take it back to Germany. So we had a good rapport at that time. So I married my first wife, Martha, and we went to Europe and stayed there 5 years and had a wonderful time. During that period, I had a falling out with that owner. Turns out he was a little unscrupulous the way he marketed his equipment, and I decided to break off on my own. I worked with a small German company called Paratex and another French company called the Parachute Shop, and I designed the Ultra harness container for Paratex about 1986. And the same year I also was doing design work for the Parachute Shop in Besançon, France, and we designed a harness container we eventually called the Supra. And during that period I started a skydiving school doing tandem and AFF in Strasbourg, France. And for 5 years we had a nice little operation going there. Charles von Suri from Switzerland was our third partner in the operation. And the guy was awesome. Great skydiver. Spoke like 5 or 6 languages. So he was our conduit to make sure our students were learning well. And then I moved back to the United States right at the end of 1989 and was offered a job at the Relative Workshop. Initially I wanted to work in R&D, and the only job available was international marketing and sales, so I took that management job and ended up going back to Europe for the next 21 years, meeting everybody I knew then and going to multiple drop zones, boogies, and just had a great time. And eventually Relative Workshop morphed into a job with Complete Parachute Solutions, where we decided the best way to bring a military parachute system to them was a full system, canopies, harness containers, and so on. So Performance Designs, Sunpath Products, and the Relative Workshop came together to form Complete Parachute Solutions, which was the military sales and training division of those 3 companies. And that's where I am today. And I would just offer that any new jumper that's skydiving now, there's a lot of room to be a professional in the game. You can work in manufacturing, you can work at a drop zone, teaching, packing, coaching, you name it. So there's a plethora of job roles available in the industry, and I would invite you to join us, because if you do this for a living, essentially, this is, I think, my 38th year, I don't feel like I've ever really had to go to work, because I get up and I go do what I enjoy, and this is what I love. And if you've got anything out there that would help us with our museum, equipment, documentation that goes back, we would invite you to bring it on in, because it's part of the history, and it might even be part of your history.